So what we're going to do is we're going to invite Yakof Agius. You can correct me. I know him as a Yakof many years. He has been involved with either directly or indirectly and contributed towards the development of the Malta Individual Investor Program. Today his role is as Chief Officer for Risk and Compliance. He's mainly responsible for design and management of the due diligence process within the IIP. He also oversees HR and IT functions. So basically he's the guardian and the gatekeeper of the Malta IIP, but also with this IT and HR roles, he's like a human matrushka. So normally Yakof is only 40 kilos and little guy, but with all these layers of responsibility is slightly well built. So we're going to invite him over so he can tell us all about this risk matrix. Yakof?
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. As Hakan just said, I'm the guy who has to talk about something complex, like the Citizenship by Investment Risk Matrix, in a short time, just before the coffee break. Thanks, Charles. That's almost like asking someone to review an IIP application in 120 days. So basically, the gentleman before me explained how to acquire information, and Andrea just explained the biggest red flags in the industry. And that's why we came up with the idea of a risk matrix, because when we looked at ways of improving the due diligence process, we realized that we could give better structure to the risk assessment stage. We also saw an opportunity to have better alignment in terms of the interpretation of risk levels. We wanted to go from an unstructured way of reviewing an application to a process which was more systematic, and we wanted to reduce the subjective elements of the review process and instead adopt a more objective methodology. How did we achieve this? As Colin suggested, we just Googled it, got a template, and used that. No, not really. What we did is we took an evidence-based approach towards improving our risk assessment process. So first, we looked at the kind of requests that our case officers were sending to the agents, requests for information about further ID documents, about sources of funds and wealth, reputational issues. We took this information, we quantified it, and we categorized it. Then we discussed with some stakeholders what aspects they felt should be taken into consideration when reviewing the applications. We met with the parliamentary secretary, with service providers, with licensed agents, and we also discussed amongst our senior management team. We then factored in the input from the world's best experts in due diligence for the IIP, our case officers. These individuals possess a wealth of experience in terms of IIP applications, and their crucial insight needed to be taken into consideration. We looked at the legal notice that oversees the program and the risk elements mentioned within. And finally, we also looked at some academic research about citizenship by investment and risk management. And the end result was the risk matrix that we currently use today. Basically, we achieved a matrix with 5 levels of risk across 7 different categories. First category allows us to gauge the identification and verification of the applicants and whether they have resided in a sanctioned country for 10 years preceding the application. Category number 2 helps us evaluate how much of the applicant's business is in high-risk industries, high-risk jurisdictions, and offshore activity. Number 3 guides us with looking into whether applicants are a PEP, have sanctions, or are in any watch lists. Fourth category is all about the sources of funds and wealth and looks at the evidence provided to support the relationship between income, wealth, and the relative timelines. Reputation and adverse media fall under the 5th category, where we'll look into the severity, the provenance, and the validity of the content. Number 6 takes into consideration civil or criminal charges and convictions regulatory breaches. It also factors in any fines and the value of those fines. And finally, the seventh category takes into account the impact of the applicant's activities on the closed networks and society in general. Across these 7 categories, there are 5 levels of risk, ranging from obviously insignificant risk, so having minor impact on the application, as opposed to the far end where the risks are massive. Furthermore, availability of the information is considered as a default risk, whereby if after exhaustive attempts we have been unable to obtain information about all 7 categories, then the application is considered as carrying the highest levels of risk across the board, because we would not be in a position to make an informed evaluation. We implemented the risk matrix in November 2017, and within 2 weeks we saw a noticeable improvement in consistency amongst the case officers on what was being checked and to what level, because we now had clear guidelines on what constituted a risk. This also helped the case officers understand what information was required and to what level of detail. Another positive impact was that we now had a framework which not only allowed us to undertake a structured risk assessment, but it also allowed us to review applications objectively and systematically. This ultimately results in case officers being able to undertake a more thorough risk assessment in less time when compared to the previous process. We are keen to continuously improve this tool, and one of the actions we are taking to develop this further is to record application risk profiles against the final outcome. This means that with enough data, the risk matrix will be able to predict the outcome of an application based on its risk profile. Periodical reviews of the risk matrix allow us to plug into factors such as AML, CFT, regulatory changes, changes in the MIIP's legislation, or changes in risk appetite. Our view is that our model of the CBI risk matrix is a practical application of an evidence-based framework, which, even though is still in its infancy, may be explored further by bodies such as the IMC, with a view of encouraging other CIPs to adopt something similar. This would facilitate new levels of standardization, transparency, and integrity, which will ultimately result in increased levels of trust in the industry. Ladies and gentlemen, at this stage we are only running the risk of the coffee getting cold. It's a privilege for me to be here today. Thank you, and I'll ask everyone to give a round of applause to the case officers in the due diligence team, which are not with us today. We have the customer service team here, so please join me in a round of applause for those individuals. Thank you.